We both know that self-care is important, but how can we use our journals to actually help with that? Maybe you can relate, but I often find that I struggle with self-care, remembering to do the things that are going to keep me well, both physically and mentally. But the layouts that we're looking at in today's video are the ones that I found have a measurable impact on my baseline wellness. I can rely on them to help me help myself. Let's have a look. The first layout we have is a self-care routines tracker, and this is for those smaller, tangible things that I can do either on a daily or weekly basis to take better care of myself. The most approachable way I find to track these ones is on a weekly basis, but this does also mean you have to set up a tracker every single week for them. So if I'm feeling a little bit more ambitious, more like I can be relied on to use the tracker for a full month, I'll set a monthly one up instead. This does sometimes come with a downfall that I'm not necessarily the best at keeping up with monthly trackers. Sometimes I'll fall away at about the mid-month point, but if I start the month strong and actually getting in and using it, I'm usually more inclined to continue. The important part about this self-care routines tracker though is making sure I'm focusing on routines that actually move the needle. They're the ones that are going to have an impact on my self-care, whether that be physical or mental. They're the ones that I don't necessarily do every single day if I'm not tracking them, and by tracking them, I'm more inclined to get them done. Big examples of this would include things like water intake. I am notoriously bad at remembering to actually take a sip of water in the day. Yes, I'm getting water in other forms, but it would be nice to increase my baseline water intake, and I find that this tracker helps with that. In terms of the general structure of this tracker though, I usually have all of the different routines that I'm trying to keep track of along the top. I often like to use icons for these rather than writing them out in full, just because it makes it look a little bit cute. And then down the side of the tracker, I'll have any of the days that I'm tracking over. So that could be the days of the month if it's a monthly tracker, or the days of the week if it's a weekly tracker. For any day in question where I complete one of those routines though, I can just go to the relevant column and row and check that routine off. Not only do you want to make sure that you're paying attention to which routines you pick for this tracker, you also want to make sure you're picking your scale appropriately. For instance, if I put on my tracker, drink 2 liters of water each day, I might hit that some days, but oftentimes this will feel unapproachable. I'm not really going to check that off very many days because it kind of seems demotivating. If instead I put on my tracker something like drink a sip of water, even though it sounds ridiculously small, I will actually get more water intake across the month compared to trying to track whether I got 2 liters a day. If you make the goal too hard, you're just not going to work on it. Our next self-care layout that I like to include though is a self-care bingo board. Now this is one you've probably heard of before, it is kind of popular, but I also really just like it for the gamification of self-care. If I can make things fun, if I can make it feel like it's a game, I'm more likely going to get in and do it. In terms of the structure of this one, you just set up a bingo board of any dimensions you want. Oftentimes I'll go with a 3x3 for a month because that just gives me space for 9 things. Or if I want to track it for a little bit longer, maybe a quarter or even a half year, I might be ambitious and go with a 5x5. But once you have the general structure down, then you just want to populate it with your self-care tasks. I like to do a mixture of just for fun self-care things and then also more practical things, just so then it doesn't feel like a chore to use the layout. Yes, we've gamified it, so that makes it a little more fun, but if every single task on there just feels like a slog, probably won't use that layout. If you are going with more practical tasks though, what can be good is to set yourself a reward for completing different sections of the board. So your first horizontal, first vertical, first diagonal, what kind of little treat could you give yourself for having done those things? This also kind of doubles up on the self-care. Little treats are nice. We like little treats. When it comes to how this layout is good for my self-care though, or how it improves my wellness, it's kind of twofold. So the first being the kind of setting up of the layout. It's a bit of fun to set it up and, think of the different things that I want to populate it with. Also in populating it, it gives me things to look forward to for the month ahead. Often I'll put little events on there that I know are coming up, things that I can look forward to. The second way that it helps though is just keeping me accountable to getting things done. Yes, this is for those practical self-care tasks, the ones that are a little bit of work, they're not so much fun, but in doing them they are going to have a benefit for our wellness. But it also kind of holds me accountable for the just for fun things as well, because oftentimes I won't make time in my schedule for leisure if I don't have the specific intention to do that. and the bingo board holds me accountable to it. You don't have to set this one up as a bingo board. It could just be kind of like a bucket list or checklist for the month of things you want to do in terms of your self-care. I just like the visual aspect of the bingo board more. The third layout that I like to use is probably the one with the worst name, and that is a brain dump space. I often go with the term brainstorm or mind unwind because I just think it sounds a little bit nicer, but the general gist here is that I'm just trying to get everything out of my head and onto the page. Oftentimes, a lot of the self-care that I need to do is mental self-care, just trying to get all of those thoughts out of my head so that I can process through them, look at them objectively, and then take steps to move forward. When it comes to the general structure of this one, I normally just keep it pretty loose. It's just usually a list of anything and everything that's going from my head onto the paper, but I'll sometimes also like to include a column down the left-hand side so that when it comes to sorting out or sorting through those different brain dump entries, I have a dedicated space to put in a color code or a signifier just so that I can pull out the different types of information. Just helps to make the brain dump a little bit more user-friendly after I've finished dumping all the thoughts. If you don't like the term brain dump, as said, I like to use mind unwind. You could also do a brain download, just give it a simple title of thoughts and musings. Anything that kind of speaks to you if that other term isn't really your vibe. But another layout that I like to use in conjunction with this is what we call a trigger list. This is another one where the name might not really resonate with you or gel with you, so some people like to call it a spark list instead. But the idea for this one is that it's just a list of prompts that help you trigger thoughts for your brain dump, or help spark inspiration for things that you could put on your brain dump. It gets you thinking about the different areas or categories of your life, different aspects of common things that you have going on, and trying to think about any tasks, thoughts, notes that you can put onto your brain dump, get those things out of your head. I like to section mine out into different life areas just to keep the trigger list a little bit more organized, and we do have a printable version in our free resource library, which is linked in the description box below. Can be really helpful to have an example to make your own trigger or spark list. Now, if you've been around the channel for a while, you know that I love reflection, so we were going to have a reflection style layout in this lineup, but the one in particular that is most beneficial for my self-care would have to be the mid-month review. As the name suggests, this one is done at the mid-month point, which funnily enough is also the point where my motivation usually slumps the hardest. Pretty consistently, I find that regardless of how much motivation I started the month with, when it comes to the mid-month point, this is where motivation has hit its lowest point, which makes it an ideal point for a check-in. I often frame my mid-month reviews around goals and projects that I'm working on, just as an intentional time to consider what's working, what's not, do I need to make any adjustments moving forward so that I can make the most progress possible. While goals and project are primarily the focus here, I do still find them very useful for my self-care. If I'm getting to the mid-month point feeling completely burned out, like I haven't been taking care of myself, this is when I'm actually going to take stock of that. Otherwise, throughout the month, I'm usually kind of on autopilot, not really paying attention to how I'm feeling, both physically and mentally. So having the set aside time to make sure I'm doing that check-in is really useful. In terms of the structure of this one, I usually like to set it up with some predefined sections, giving them a little header or a little title, so that as I do that mid-month check-in process, I can just bounce around the page and add information into the relevant section. Sections that I typically like to include on here are things like actions that I've completed or have been accomplished. I need to focus on this one because otherwise I'll just let my negativity bias take over and get into this kind of negative headspace like, oh, I haven't done anything this month. No, I have, I just need to write it down so that I remember that I did it. I'll also include things like challenges that I've been facing, mainly so that I can problem solve them and move forward with some intention of how to navigate that space. And also anything that I want to prioritize for the rest of the month. While these are the 4 that I like to use, I'd be curious to hear about any layouts in your journal or planner for self-care. But if you are on the hunt for more layout ideas that you can use for mental health in particular, then this video is the next one to check out. In that one, we have 26 different layouts that you could use in your journal to help support your mental wellness. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.